just in case.
I did. I was just saying to Carrie, I got the, I finished the presentation on Friday afternoon. We went out for a bite to eat. When I came home, I missed a step. And I have a hairline fracture in my right shoulder. There's nothing incapacitating about it except it hurts.
But my daughter did the same thing in a foot injury. And then on the same day, our priest actually broke her foot. I don't know whether cement has become uneven since we've been in the pandemic or we've forgotten how to walk, but
I've become uneven.
Injuries. Yeah. It's like, I guess when we were at home, you just didn't hear people doing this stuff, but now they're out and about. But anyway.
I've already noticed my proprioception is terrible. Terrible.
Well, I don't think we've challenged it, for the last year and a half too. So it's not like we're Simone Biles where we suddenly lost it. I think I never could soar through the air with the greatest of ease. So
now Carrie runs every day and always has run every day. So she's in much better shape than we are.
That's the point. You've kept it up. But I have to admit, it is so rare that I even go out that driving is like, I'm 16 again. Look both ways. Don't take risks. People are honking behind me. And I was like, what are you, little old lady? Yeah.
Carrie, I shared the statement on the Olympic athlete and her use of marijuana with Dr. Beeman.
Word. Oh, cool.
Yeah, it was a good statement. It was a really good statement.
Well, the Olympics are very high visibility places. So for things like this that happen, it starts the dialoguing. And I have to say this, I know I'm being recorded, but I have a daughter that's now in her third round of COVID. And I will say related to some behaviors. Yeah. But she called me and she said, I listened to what Simone Biles says, and I'm finally going to take control of my health behaviors. 42 years her mother has been nagging her to no avail, right? But Simone Biles breaks through and she says, I really need to mask. I need to, make good health decisions.
And so Texas. Is she in Texas?
One in Texas. And everywhere she goes, she has this encounter with COVID, but she doesn't want to mask up because, that makes her look like, she's weak or whatever. And Simone Biles coming out saying, it's okay to be weak. It's okay to be vulnerable. You've got to look after your health. Suddenly made her realize, I'm putting a mask on. I don't care what
I think it makes you look smart. I don't think it makes you look
I know. I just, and we've decided to use the word, ignorant in the true sense that those Texans do not know what they don't know.
They're having trouble in Florida.
We're having trouble in Florida. We're getting a lot of sick faculty members down there. Yeah. So anyway, well, respect for you. Let's go ahead and start. And I'm going to turn my video off because we need to focus on you.
Okay. And I know Michelle did respond, but I haven't heard from her today. So
we can always record it and share. That's allowed.
Yeah, we're recording. So that's fine. And I thought, I can go through the entire presentation again, or we can really focus. I have some questions about data collection. And is there something I'm not thinking of?
I just go quickly through the preamble that we've already discussed and really hone in on the changes we made. How's that?
Let's do that. All right. Let me just share my screen here. All right. You got me, right? You both can see?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So the title remains the same. I still think it's a reasonable title. And we had originally talked about why we use the word cannabis and not marijuana, the different kinds of uses that we have found and are substantially proven through literature for cannabis, the internal cannabinoids, and we discussed the endocannabinoid system. Dr. Beeman has heard this twice in the last week from me, but the whole endocannabinoid system, what a complex system it is. And I've begun to really think of our external cannabinoids or our phytocannabinoids as almost supplements when our internal system gets depleted. That it definitely has some medicinal qualities that we've learned more and more and more as we go through, and more literature is published. We're beginning to see more and more medicinal value, and some of the lesser cannabinoids that we don't have so many of in the United States, we're beginning to see an influx of, and that's been helpful in terms of identifying products that can really help patients with some of their illnesses. My contention is that there is a very responsible decision process that goes on in many adults that determine that they don't want to any longer use allopathic medicines and they would like to turn to something that's more natural, specifically to cannabis in this particular instance that allows them to treat with a much lesser risk profile and fewer side effects. And that's one of the reasons that people are making this decision. They also are using it for replacement or reduction therapy for some of their other medications, specifically opioids, which I know personally, I have helped a number of people really get into a place where they've got a very low dose of opioids and have used cannabis to supplement that or to potentiate it or to completely replace them over a period of several weeks. My belief is there's a lack of education and the inability to have an informed consent process when we go through the typical certification process that we see today, that very few people actually give any education when they're certifying. They simply say, you've got the right diagnosis, I'll hook you into the website that is responsible for this, and that's the end of it. And I think a lot of people are really very shocked when they find out that this responsible decision has in fact turned into something that doesn't allow them the appropriate job that they're educated for and skilled for. So there are in fact some consequences. Generally, I'm talking about employment consequences, but we certainly know that some of the admissions to colleges, universities, some schools will not allow you in without a urine drug screen and will disallow you if it is positive. Again, we reiterate that there's a lot of medicinal value. The value has been understood for over 5,000 years, and it had been perfectly legal to pursue the treatment of different symptoms and diseases with cannabis until about 1937. Large pharmaceutical companies, including Lilly and SmithKline French, Bristol Myers Squibb, all had cannabis in their preparations. And after the Tax Act, because it made it so expensive to continue to use cannabis in medicine, and so taxed, that a lot of them discontinued the use of that, although it is still permitted if there is nothing else that they can use in order to provide the same symptom relief, but very well taxed. So patients have either never used cannabis or have used cannabis previously, and they're seeking more direction in identifying the best medicine for one of their symptoms. And they fall into one or two categories: the patients who have chosen to do this and really have made a concerted effort to learn about it before they use, or patients who discover it on their own from a source that may be unknown, maybe have been from the black market or the guy down the street, but found that as they began to use cannabis, they felt better for whatever reason. And they have discovered this and they want a little bit more direction in that as well. I had included this map this morning. We can put this as a darker blue because in fact, they have passed their CBD program. So now we only have Idaho that is lingering, shall we say. Through a lot of research, I found the certification process is flawed. Less than 6% of the people I queried do any kind of education during their certification process. I have one practitioner in Maryland that I refer to a lot, and she actually goes through the whole gambit of information and sends a patient to me with, in fact, a description of the kinds of things that she thinks they would do best with in terms of how much CBD, how much THC, how much of the other lesser cannabinoids, and what terpenes they want. A group of healthcare providers jumped at this chance to become certifiers because In most states, they don't have to have any education or very little education. And it's generally $150 to $200 a pop for a 15-minute consultation where people actually become certified. So I'm not sure it was always for the right reasons is the point of this statement. Could be, may not be. And do certifiers do it with some dignity? Do they reaffirm the person's perhaps very good conscious decision to go this route and try cannabis for medicine? Or, and is it educational? Do they do anything towards making sure that the patient knows everything about the process before they actually enter into it? We know that informed consent is necessary in every medical encounter. I'm not sure that it is incorporated into a certification encounter, and that's of concern to me. That was one of the knowledge gaps that I wanted to identify and really help people understand how important it is to make sure people know everything before they make their decision. And the educational needs are not only for the certifiers, but for some of the legislative bodies, as well as the certifiers and the HR policymakers. So they really have the accurate information to go forth and make some more policies or pass legislative bills that come before them. So my background is little forward movement on employment issues until just this past couple of weeks. We've begun to see states understand that if they are going to legalize cannabis and put in new programs, they're going to have to change some of their employment laws. And Dr. Beeman has sent me a couple of articles. I found a couple of articles that say that they're really sort of relooking at their employment policies and the need for urine drug screens, particularly for THC. So there's begun to be a little bit of movement on that issue just of late. I did have the opportunity to interview an HR person that said they have begun to understand that not every job needs to be denied someone simply because they have cannabis in their urine drug screen. And they've begun to overlook that or to classify jobs in such a way that they don't require a THC test. And there's no clear look at what a patient needs to know to safely, and I mean both emotionally and when they're caring for themselves, and the decision is made to care for themselves very often when they are attempting to get off of medications that just really do not do well by them and have some really bad side effects, but also physically, what do they need to know to safely and physically use cannabis? And if there is not a state requirement that you teach somebody, people are not doing it. Here comes the need for cannabis educators like myself or clinical directors or a certifier that is also an educator. And I did in one of my classes just this week have one of the certifiers in our state who always teaches as she goes along. And so that was interesting for my students to see that that's a possibility when you are doing certifications. We know physical safety of the patient needs to be attended to in some occasions, that they just really need to be able to safely use medicine without getting jeopardized for it. School admissions, potential employment challenges are not shared, and that is a key knowledge gap. All right, then the problem statement. Patients will often turn to cannabis as a responsible step towards discontinuing their use of narcotics or other powerful traditional or allopathic medications. They do not see the education they need in a non-judgmental way. The cannabis patients are unaware that using cannabis as a medicine can render themselves unemployable. And they may also be unaware that they can lose their job as a result, sorry about that, lose their job as a result of a random drug screen or if they are tested for cause. Employers are not educated on the medical effects of cannabis and that intoxication is not necessarily inherent in every cannabis medication that you take. To gain understanding is our purpose of education provided to new certifying patients, to discover if there is a preparation for informed consent given to a patient prior to their certification process, and to understand what HR policymakers need to know to develop appropriate policies as laws continue to change. We talked earlier about Maslow's hierarchy of needs and the need for self-care. And as was suggested, I read a lot of the critiques of Maslow's theory and just the fact that there's these really absolutely important needs in the physiological base of this pyramid, and that a lot of it is a lot of people are suggesting that self-care and compassion and just really taking care of oneself sort of be down in those physiological needs. Although it was developed in 1946 and we didn't have the endocannabinoid system until the 1990s, they're very much aligned, almost exactly word for word, all the way down the main points of each, the endocannabinoid system and Maslow's hierarchy of need, with the biggest one being homeostasis or balance in the body. Maslow knew that there are needs that take precedence over all others in the human body. And besides the physiological ones, also this compassion, self-compassion and self-care is something that is very important and is aligned with the endocannabinoid system. We know what the definition of homeostasis is. It's that balancing of the body to keep every system on an even keel. Homeostasis and the endocannabinoid system work on negative feedback loops. So if we have a trigger come in, even in a presynaptic phase, that the endocannabinoids really sort of try to get anxiety, for instance, brought down to a much calmer level, really not get it totally exacerbated and out of control. This is in contrast to a lot of the other systems that react in our body and our positive feedback loops, which actually amplify the stimuli that comes into the body instead of diminishing it. They move it was described that they move the system away from its starting point. We really want to be at that starting point where there continues to be balance. And at the time that Maslow developed his theory, we know that the ECS was not yet completely discovered. However, we know that in spite of that, the alignment is really very, very systematic right down the line. And understanding the system and its function solidifies the connection between the two. And I did include this. It's just that physiological and the actual mention of homeostasis is in that baseline. And in the critiques that I read, they really, as I said, wanted to move some of the self-care and compassion in as well. Just homeostasis, the hierarchy really talks about sleep being something that's very necessary. The endocannabinoid system, in fact, helps sleep be established. One of the cannabinoids that we have just begun to utilize in much greater incidence in cannabis medicine, at least in the state of Maryland, is CBN, which is a sedative and really a sleep initiator, and people do really well with it. Sort of the health and mood, sort of the general state of health and your general mood, the endocannabinoid system really wants to keep you on an even keel. Sex being one of the hierarchy's mandatory necessities, and reproduction and fertility being something that the endocannabinoid system does work towards providing some balance, and air and well-being. So the methodology, it's a cross-sectional study. It's really remained the same. Research to a targeted group during a stable time frame. So we're not going to do anything longitudinal. We're going to do a 1 or 2 time recruitment and attempt to get people at one point in time in their life that they can relate to me what has gone on in terms of their employment desires and their cannabis use. I have gotten permission to use the ACNA website just on a message board. Spoken to a woman named Marissa Fertoni, and she is willing to put up my solicitation or recruitment request on our Facebook page. I have some questions about how to do it on LinkedIn, although I know it's acceptable and legal to do. I'm just not sure who I get permission from on there. And then for my established subjects, and we do have 2 or 3 people that have contacted me and really want to be a part of this study, but they also have other people they know that they are going to refer to. Cannabis Nurses Network, which is another professional organization, has a news board that I can put the recruitment request up. And then cannabis dispensaries, I have 3 or 4 different cannabis dispensaries that are willing to let me post it to my patients. Just simply, if you have any interest in an employment issue or any employment issues with cannabis, please let me know. And then the scheduling for follow-up interviews come. I still am thinking that if I can get about 12 to 15 people and have 8 to 10 really good, solid interviews, that should suffice for our thematic kind of discernment and what's going on with these patients. So I will schedule for the follow-up interviews. I expect them to take 1.5 to 2 hours. The potential subjects will agree to have interviews and provide responses to very open-ended questions. I am going to include some basic demographics. I'm really interested in gender, what state they live in, the kind of educational level they have, along with training and skills. And that's in addition here this morning, training and skills. I'm really interested in if people are losing out on jobs and that in fact disallows them from using the skills and the education that they've already accomplished in something that they are interested in doing and could be very good at doing. And then questions about their own certification process and what occurred during that process will be part of the questions. What's required in their own state if they know, and I am actually going through working on a table that has the state and what the requirements for the certification health provider are in terms of education. Some exploration or interviewing about the difficulty that they've experienced in obtaining employment or in job loss. If they had used traditional medicines before, if cannabis came to them as a last resort. And many times people say, I've tried everything else and I just can't get a hold of this neuropathic pain or whatever. And so they really feel like it is their last resort. Open-ended questions, making sure that I give them plenty of opportunity to answer fully. I have been using the Gateway method of one-to-one interviewing as I have begun to explore how I'm going to conduct these interviews. Contextualization and key definitions, just making sure that people understand sort of the reasoning for the questions and also the definitions of the words that I am using. We will record them, give them the opportunity to answer questions or clarify once their recording has been made. And I just want to make sure that they in fact said exactly what they meant to and that there's no changes that they want to make. And I know that online surveys can collect a greater number of responses, but I don't think it's going to get to the depth of the experiential recording that I want to make. This is my recruitment message. And I wanted to make it as clear and simple as I could. And that's why I did put the word marijuana in, just in case somebody had not connected those two before, and wanted to let them know that it is completely anonymous and exactly how long it will take and how to respond to me if they are interested. I submitted my informed consent in a separate document, which I can bring up if you wish at the end. I know Dr. Beeman has that, and I do have no questions on the informed consent, but I do have it on my IRB application, which I'll talk to you about in a minute. So the research questions exactly are the following. Again, reiteration of what I've said before, that recording of demographic information. I do need to add educational level and skill set in here. Employment consequences, do they know if there are any consequences of the legal use of medical cannabis in their state? Are potential patients sufficiently educated? Is the information provided in a non-judgmental and dignified manner? Is it compassionate? Is it caring, as we want all nursing interactions to be and all interviewing interactions to be, which will really encourage them to be more open? Have they experienced the difficulty in getting employment? Do they know if there's a possibility that they could suffer a job loss if they were random screened? And do you shy away from particular employment opportunities to avoid a urine drug screen? And I did come up with a person who volunteered to be a subject this week, and he works in landscaping, even though he has a horticultural degree, but he knows in some of the companies that are bigger and need his degree, they also drug screen. And so he works for a landscaping company for just that reason. And significance being that we want to have a best practice for healthcare providers. Do patients need to be informed? Yes, they need to be informed. And can we establish some sort of best practice around that? And the fact that full disclosure regarding their employability is necessary. That the significance is we know there's an HR policymaker knowledge gap, in this concept that all cannabis equals THC equals intoxication, when in fact that's not at all the case. And it's important for both patients and the organizations that patients get to have the jobs that they're skilled for and educated for, and organizations gets to have talent that they really need in their company. And policymakers need to have the education. And I've been likening it to, we never had any kind of education about sexual aggression or sexual misbehavior. And we also need some education just like that, and a required yearly. This is what the use of cannabis can provide. And this is what why it would be good for the company and for people to be aware of it. We know there are medical patients in 48 states, at least for CBD products, and they're taking the use of medical cannabis into consideration because either they try it and it works for them, or somebody has tried it and it works for them, and people talk. And I know generally when I bring up the subject, and I don't always offer it straightforwardly, but if they ask me what I do, I talk to them about it. And they go, oh, I've been using that for years, or, oh, I get mine here, or my grandson talked me into getting my medical card. I hear cases like that every single day. And so I think that there are a great number of people taking this into consideration and understanding that it might be a better choice for them than the traditional allopathic medicines that they've been using. And what I'm doing is not trying to prove anything, but I am trying to identify the experiences and record them so we can understand if there are some themes in them, and maybe take that information to use to make some changes in the future. And, we will continue to use the information to identify knowledge gaps and where improvement is needed, but there are some that certainly I suspect already, and I've already mentioned those. Okay. So very specifically, my data collection procedures are, first step being the solicitation or the recruitment is made to listed sites. I'm still sort of struggling with who to get permission from, but I will figure that out. Make a database of the respondents and a numerical assignment. So as soon as I get somebody who is interested in being a subject, is interested in going through the consent form and really understanding the consent, then I will in fact assign them a numerical identifier, and that numerical identifier will be kept in a locked file cabinet, which I just purchased one. And interviews are scheduled and conducted once they are consented and have their number. Answers will be collected, experiences recorded. I will make sure that they get an opportunity to listen to their recording and make sure that that's the information that they really intended to address. The identification of thematic similarities. I'm doing a lot of reading about how you pick out similarities in words and how you don't want to change grammatics or any kind of grammatical errors or anything like that, that you definitely want to see if there are words or way that people have describing it that they come up over and over again. And then finally, conclusions drawn and next steps identified. It will be a fairly short confidential interview. I just was reading this morning about confidentiality and understand that you can't just allow them to sign their consent form and assume that they understand the confidentiality here. That actually must be explained to each person specifically and separately, in addition to seeing it written in their consent form. I want to know whether or not they were aware as they went through the certification process that there were consequences. If they were aware they could be unemployable, if they were aware they could lose their job. When they got their cannabis card, was it explained that it did not offer protection, just like a traditional prescription does? So you can hand somebody your Percocet prescription and get hired, but you cannot hand them your medical card. Is there an opportunity, or have they lost an opportunity to become employed secondary to their cannabis use? So did they find the perfect job? Did they in fact get a job offer, which often happens, and then when their drug screen comes back, it's reneged upon or withdrawn? Have they ever been dismissed because of random or for cause urine drug screening, if there was an accident in the workplace, for instance? Has the lack of employment due to cannabis use interfered with your ability to support yourself or your family? And I had some question about whether or not this was relevant, but I think that it probably is, because in terms of self-caring and self-worth, I think it's really important to understand that if you see it as your position in your family to be supportive of your family monetarily, then this does make a difference. Have you chosen to return to traditional allopathic pharmaceuticals because of your inability to procure employment when you are using cannabis? And there are many people who go back to opioids or other sort of, I don't want to say totally toxic, but I mean, everybody in the world seems to be on gabapentin along with its long myriad of side effects. And yet they'll return to that because they can't get a job when they're using cannabis with, less risk profile and side effects. And I'm interested in knowing just simply if there are people who have researched or discovered that there are ways to cheat on a urine drug screen. I certainly don't want to promote that, but there are people who sort of are backed into a corner and they consider using one of these methods simply because they know that by using cannabis, they're actually a better employee and not a worse employee, and they really want a particular position. We know that this does not represent the entire population of adults, and it doesn't even represent the entire population of cannabis users. It is a completely volunteer sample, and we know that because there's some stigma associated with the use of cannabis, that there are going to be people who either are not totally assured by the confidentiality process that's explained to them, or that they just are afraid to come forward with their experiences. The limitations of the degree to which the findings can be generalized, we can generalize it to a smaller population of people who have had employment experiences, but not to the much larger population. There was a limited availability of empirical literature on employment and cannabis use. However, over the last 3 months, I've seen a marked change in the amount of empirical literature that is available now as states are beginning to really sort of consider their employment protection laws. And it is understood that the topic addresses a medicine that remains federally illegal, hopefully not for too much longer. A lot of new legislation in front of Congress, but I'm hoping that although it remains federally illegal now, we may see a change in that in the next year and a half or so. It's a qualitative study, simply lived experiences and an exploration and a recording of those. The intended goal of the study is to collect those experiences of 8 to 10 cannabis patients, and maybe 15 to 20 will be solicited just to make sure that I have at least the 8 to 10 really good interviews. And the research focuses on the lack of information provided to patients, consequences of procuring and using medical cannabis are unknown at this point. There's a lack of accurate information on the part of HR policymakers and a lack of responsibility on the part of some healthcare providers who are offering certification without education. And there is an opportunity to provide educational materials for certifiers and change the process positively. So that is the end of that piece of it. Okay. Now, Dr. Beeman, do you want to have a moment with Carrie, or do you want to answer questions or what have you?
At this point, we do any questions? Anybody have any questions?
I don't have any questions.
Yeah, and I've been working with you, so, any questions that have come up, we've already gone over, so.
Okay. I do have a couple of questions.
Sure.
It actually is, I think the informed consent is fine. On my IRB application, there were a couple of things that sort of stumped me a little bit. Other than having a locked file cabinet, having the numerical identifiers in a locked file cabinet whenever I'm not adding to it, or keeping it in a file cabinet. Is there anything else I can do about confidentiality to convince people that this information will go no further?
I think that you do need to reassure them on the informed consent, or they won't be honest. And
Okay.
then the backside is you want to make sure that you are not, spreading it or identifying it, or when you're writing it up. And of course, we'll be very cautious about that. You don't say Harold Smith, blah, blah. We won't let you do that.
We're not going to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the protections are in place. I think I've shared with you, I serve on the IRB, and what they basically look for is are you showing knowledge of why you need to protect this? And this topic, oh yes,
Oh,
because
yeah.
this is legal problems. So I think you need to convince the IRB that you understand
Okay.
why you're locking it up, and you'll do that on, you know, a very detailed, informed consent, and by showing that, you know, you're even going to lock it up and that you're going to do that. And then of course the IRB expects us to make sure that you don't name Harold Smith
Right.
in your work. So I think we've really gone through all of that. And, you know, I think also the way you're tapping into these volunteers that seem to be approaching you, there's obviously a certain level of trust. So, I mean, that's good that people are wanting to tell you about this experience, almost in the hope that it will change it for others. So,
Mhm.
so that's nice. I mean, it's not that you're not trusted.
Yeah.
So I think some of these people you already know, and so they do trust you, or they, someone who trusts you vouches for you. So I think
Right.
that's going to be helpful in recruiting versus, I don't know, taking an ad out and it's like, who is this person? And
Exactly.
is the government gathering data about me? I think that's where then you wouldn't get candid answers, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and when I was doing a lot of research, and I mean, clearly I don't have a pool of people that's already established that has had employment issues with cannabis. So there's not a pool I can draw from. But I think that pursuing people in the right places, like the different websites that I have permission to use, and you know, and those sorts of organizations will provide the people that I need and the people that may have already grappled with some of these things. I mean, because they are identified as people that are either interested in or already using cannabis as for whatever reason, but you know, particularly for medicine. So, do you have any suggestions? I know that people solicit for recruiters or recruits on LinkedIn all the time. Is that an appropriate place to put it? And if so, where do I get permission from these people? I've sort of looked, and it's within the guidelines of what you can put up. I mean, it's not like it's out of, you know, out of the regulations for what you can post on LinkedIn.
You shouldn't need permission from LinkedIn. So long as your IRB approves
Okay.
that as a
Okay.
platform to use,
Mhm.
and you're just going to be linking to, you know, the information about the project and
And not about anything specific. Okay.
right.
So I think that's the questions I had. I mean, I kept racking my brain for anything else I could do for confidentiality. And then it's my understanding that you can jump drive everything and you keep it for 3 years. And we have a safe. So that's where I was going to keep my jump drive once I transferred things.
You're using identifiers for each person, like numbers or whatever.
Numerical. Mhm.
Yeah, that's pretty much standard. So
Okay. Okay. Okey doke. I just wonder, you know, I know that confidentiality is such a big issue and I keep thinking, well, is there anything else I could do to protect it? So, and I certainly don't foresee any situation where, other than I do have a reader for this, dissertation, and I can get documentation that she also understands, but I don't think that she would even know either who the people are. She will never have access to the document that, you know, assigns the numerical identifiers. So,
and usually, you know, if IRB thinks of something or they see a weakness in your protecting privacy, they're just going to point it out and ask you to change something.
okay.
So I wouldn't worry.
Yeah, I can say I serve on the IRB. It's rarely that we say, go back to square one. It's usually, have you thought of this? Or you might want to add this line, or, you know, it's more suggestive than anything else on how to improve it. And sometimes it's even, no, you don't have to go to all that trouble. You know, we had one the other day, and oh my gosh, the guy was like overcomplicated with mixed methods and all this. And we're like, no, 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 no. just, let's narrow down the focus, narrow down the numbers. So in many ways, it's making it a better project because people are so wanting to impress the IRB that often they they throw in the kitchen sink. So the IRB's job, I mean, it's not something to be feared. They just have thought of ways to protect, which builds trust. I mean, so if they do give you a suggestion, it's usually something that will help build trust. Like when you go to LinkedIn, use this verbiage because you'll recruit more people. It'll be something helpful. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And I really appreciate, I've given 2 presentations for Dr. Beeman in the last 2 weeks, Carrie. And at the end, I didn't mention my study at all. And she said, aren't we going to talk to them about the study that we're going to do? And see if they have anybody that could potentially be interested. And I didn't think to sort of verbally include that also, but I appreciate that. I actually have had one response from somebody in the first group in the nursing assistants, medical assistants that has contacted me.
Hey, I'm here to cheerlead for you.
Okay, so what, I know my next class starts on August 17th, assuming I go forward. And I have to get that response back from the IRB. I can't do anything until they approve me, correct?
Yeah, and don't look at that as harsh either. What Aspen does is it this class bills you towards the IRB. Now, I will tell you, we meet really quickly, but we meet as quickly as we can, and it's a pretty large IRB.
Okay,
So perish the thought that we're all in the summit, which we might be, and busy for 3 days.
okay.
Although if we're all in a summit, we might quickly meet about you. And we don't want you to start the clock ticking on the next course without IRB approval. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
So I
absolutely.
like the way they structure this. Okay, you get ready for the IRB, and then rather than starting the time clock, you get IRB approval, and then you start the next one. But I don't want you to think, oh my gosh, it's going to be 6 months before I get IRB approval, because the way it hits Dr. Ballard's email box, and then he sends out one of those doodle polls for usually 3 or 4 days. That's it.
Okay.
And you see how, and it's, I'll tell you what, it's what day can I get the most people?
Okay.
So it's not like the entire IRB must be present or else we don't meet. It's not that, it's not that complicated, but she picks the date that the most people can come. Hopefully I'll be there. And then we go for it. And as I said, it's usually helpful because it's how to help you be more successful rather than punitive. I know that there's a lot of folklore out there about, oh my gosh, the IRB, but I found that they think of things that often, this is the first time you've done this. This is the umpteenth time they've done this.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I hadn't heard any real horror stories other than it takes a really long time, and I'm relieved to feel that we don't take that long. My next course is ready to start on August 17th. And so I'd like to be on that schedule, but I can certainly move it 2 weeks if need be.
And I was about to say, other places, if you miss it, then it's a whole semester till you can do it again.
Yeah, that's what I heard.
At
And
least
that was
with us,
making me
it's
really
just 2 weeks. Yeah.
Okay. All righty. So I will turn, did you see the copy of the IRB application that I sent you? Dr. Beeman?
I don't think I did.
Are you asking me or?
No, I'm asking Dr. Beeman. I sent it a couple of days ago and I had 2
Okay.
things highlighted in yellow.
Wow, you might want to send it again. I'll be honest with you, I've been having trouble with my mailbox.
I can
And
send,
IT yesterday came in and sent some test messages to see why.
okay.
So that's sort of creepy. I wonder what else I haven't been getting.
Yeah.
Send it again. The reason I know is because I sent something to the entire faculty. You probably got it. Guess what? I didn't. No, I should have, right?
Yeah.
So I said to tech, I sent something out to all faculty and I didn't get it.
Okay.
So yesterday they were checking to see, their first response is you're on the listserv. And I'm like, well, that's nice.
Yeah. However,
techies are such fun. If you're on the listserv, nothing can possibly go wrong. Yeah, right. So, oops, send it again.
all right.
Okay. Yeah, because whatever it was, they might have fixed it. They were working on it yesterday.
Okay, I just sent it once more,
Oh, let me check. Okay, cool.
just right now. Okay. So Carrie, am I going to run out of time? I keep seeing all these new laws change, and it makes me nervous. I feel like I'm in a race.
Yes, I got it. Bingo. Oh, well, good. That's a good test if my mailbox is working.
I don't think you're going to run out of time. And I think we had talked about that before. You know, even if it ends up being sort of like, okay, all this data was gathered and analyzed and then the law changed, it's like it provides a nice historical perspective and that kind of thing. I find it hard to believe that federal sort of employment laws are going to change that quickly. So
yeah, it does always drag through.
Yeah.
And I'm still very hopeful because of Cory Booker and Chuck Schumer's new legislation that they've reintroduced. I'd really like to see that make its way through, even slowly. It would be nice to see that, make its way through all of the channels it's supposed to.
Yeah, I haven't looked closely at it yet, but I know there's one of the big issues, of course, is all the tax stuff, right?
Yeah.
So, and my big concern is affordability of medicines for patients. So,
and that's not the case. I've had a lot of interesting experiences recently where I just put my foot down at a dispensary. Do not sell people this, and this. Let's try something, see if it works. And then, and because I think there's very little fiscal responsibility when it comes to dispensing cannabis.
Yeah.
All right. I know that you're busy, Carrie, so I really appreciate you spending some time.
Sure. Well, I think you're in a good spot and get the IRB done and start interviewing people.
Yes. Yeah. I'm really excited about that part. That's when it really, the rubber hits the road. So it'll be really fun. And, some of the people that have come forward and volunteered, certainly Mike has 2 or 3 other military people who have had bad experiences with CBD that has a little bit of THC in it, and are losing their 35-year career, as it were. And a couple of people who have lost licenses. And so.
Well, and that might be the answer to your previous question. If we wave a magic wand and change this, these people still have losses. So maybe we also need to go back and look at lost pensions.
That's a good point.
Prison sentences, not getting jobs, promotions, etc. I mean, this could have some far-reaching implications.
Okay.
And I'm saying that because that might be a point of discussion in your dissertation. If by the time you get it out, it's all legal, it's all good, this is not going to be something going forward, you might focus it on going backwards, because you're now telling me, I don't know this person, but it's potential that they lost their pension. We might need to look backwards.
Yeah. This gentleman did not, but he has a colleague who is an enlisted man who did.
There you go. Then there's still a reason for your dissertation.
Yeah.
Okay.
Good.
Yeah.
Good. Okay. Well, I appreciate it, ladies, very much. Thank you for taking some of your Saturday morning.
Sure.
Well, thanks for all you're doing. I appreciate it. By the way, Carrie, she's been doing an awful lot of public speaking for people I know. So she's getting out there.
That's great.
Yeah. And it's fun. One, Carrie, was the community psychiatric nurses in Virginia.
Oh,
And
cool.
they were very interested. And Carrie wrote most of that scope and standards of practice, Dr. Beeman. So I really like using that and, start out with the NCSBN's mandate. And I actually this week also did a panel discussion at a very 2 hours notice for PTSD patients. But because I had given the presentation for Dr. Beeman's group on the previous Friday, I had all of that right at my fingertips, which was really nice.
Nice.
Yeah, and it's, the panel that I was on was stunned to understand that nurses are the only group that have mandated education.
Mm-hmm.
So, they were really, I mean, they really went, really? And doctors don't have to do this? I said, they're not mandated to my knowledge.
No, they're not.
No, I was trying to figure out exactly what group would have mandated that, you know, something comparable to the state council or the national council.
It would probably come from AMA and
I think AMA.
maybe,
Yeah.
but maybe Institute of Medicine,
Okay,
Institutes, maybe. So those would probably be the two big ones. I don't know about their examination process, right? So NCSBN is responsible
Yeah.
ultimately for the NCLEX and examination process. So I don't know what their equivalent is. That might be worth finding out. But
yeah, I actually asked a couple of docs I know and they don't know either, so I'm gonna have to go further than that.
well, when I interviewed for that scholar in residence that I didn't get, that was Institute of Medicine, and they were interested in the idea of putting out a call for like all healthcare providers to be educated in this. So it, you know, it could be that it comes from that level. So
Cool.
Well, now it's the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine, so
Yeah.
you might try that.
Okay, that's where I usually get my guidelines if I'm speaking about any particular symptomology, you know, whether or not they've deemed it sufficient evidence, moderate evidence, minimal evidence. So that's where I use guidelines from there. Okay,
all right,
are we good?
good on my end.
We're good. Enjoy your weekend. Thanks for resending that. I appreciate it.
Of course, thank you.
Take
Thanks.
care. Bye-bye.
Bye.